When you go to a place of worship and you engage in the actions of worship, and you do that maybe in a routine way because it's the same things that you did maybe the Sunday before or the same things you'll do the next Sunday, it's easy in those situations to begin to take all of that for granted. But what if in the middle of it you were to ask, what's our authority for doing this? And who gave us that authority? Well, in Matthew chapter 21, the Pharisees came to Jesus. These were the chief priests and the elders of the people, and they came to him asking him, by what authority do you do these things, and who gave you that authority? He then brought up an interesting question that sort of baffled them, because he said, well, the baptism of John, was it from heaven or from men? And that focuses our attention upon this fact that whatever we teach, including about baptism, or whatever we do in our worship and in our actions as God's people, is that from heaven or is that from men? Well, you see, it's okay to do some things by the authority of men because in some cases God hasn't given us instructions. And he leaves some things to our better judgment, in which case we follow what we think is the best way to do it. And sometimes we'll do it the way that our fathers or grandfathers have done it before us. And that's okay if it's a matter about which God has not spoken. But if God has spoken about a matter, then we need to pay attention to what God has said and do what He has told us and what He has authorized, and do it as He has told us. And in previous studies, I've been bringing to our attention the importance of having authority from God in all religious matters. And you can have authority from God by reason of the fact that He's left something to your better judgment. But if God has told us what to do, then that's not left up to our better judgment. We do what He tells us. And if He's told us how to do that, then we must do it in the way that He has told us. And we've been studying about the importance of that, and I've illustrated it by looking at the well-known subject of baptism. And most people that go to church on Sunday are a part of some religious group that teaches something about baptism, and they practice baptism, some saying it's essential to salvation, some saying it's not. And it's not my purpose to get into a study of all of the different things that are taught and practiced by the different religions. I just simply summarize it by saying the Bible teaches baptism as essential to salvation. The Bible teaches us that, and therefore authorizes our teaching it and our practicing baptism as being essential to salvation. And I illustrate it in this way, that sometimes God in His Word will authorize by making an imperative statement through someone like the Apostle Peter. In Acts 2, verse 38, Peter commanded, repent and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins. Now, that's not a suggestion. That's not a hint. That's not just a little casual remark. That was a commandment. It was an imperative. And so when you find that imperative, you have found something that God has commanded, because it's His Word, and you therefore find that which God authorizes. So today we're authorized to command that people, in order to have the remission of sins, should be baptized. That's what the Bible teaches, so we teach the same. And we practice that. And we do that by God's authority, not by man's. Well, then in a similar way, we look at Mark 16, verse 16, in which Jesus declared, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, but he that believeth not shall be damned. And it was in the context of the apostles preaching the gospel, and he just simply declared, you preach the gospel to every creature, and the one that believes and is baptized is the one that will be saved. And that's not in the form of a commandment, it's not in the form of an imperative, but it is a declaration of the same truth, and that is that between the sinner and salvation is that act of being baptized. Therefore, the Bible, through that declaration of Jesus, authorizes baptism as being essential to salvation, and therefore we are authorized by God to teach baptism as being essential to salvation and practicing baptism as being essential to salvation. Those are two of the illustrations that I've used in previous broadcasts to illustrate that point. But today I want us to take it to another step, another area of consideration. What about those matters about which God has not been specific? For an example, in Mark chapter 16, in verses 15 and 16, when Jesus gave the Great Commission to the apostles, he said, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature." Now the word "go" there is a commandment. He was commanding them to go. Actually, and literally, more literally, we've come to understand that maybe he was saying, as you go into all the world, but still going into all the world. Which raises the question, how? How do we go? How did they go? Well, you can go by walking, you can go by running, you can go by crawling. But today, with the automobiles and the airplanes and so on that we have available to us, we can drive into all the world, we can fly into all the world, we can go by ship if we need to cross water. And today we have the amazing world of electronics available to us, so we can go into all the world even electronically and through the internet preach the gospel to people. So there are a lot of different ways that can be done, as long as we go and do that which he specified. And what he specified was go into all the world and preach the gospel. So if I go into all the world, but I preach something other than the gospel, then I'm not doing what the Lord told me to do. I'm not doing that which he has authorized. So we go, we preach the gospel. But again, that raises the question, how do we preach it? Or do we do it by means of television, like in this situation that I'm in right now? That would be authorized, because if I come to you in person and preach the gospel, or I come to you through television and preach the gospel, I'm doing the same thing. In one case physically, in the other case electronically. But I'm in your presence either physically or electronically, depending upon whether or not I am physically in your house or in your house by means of television. But as long as I preach the gospel, I'm authorized to do it by television. I'm authorized to do it by radio. I'm authorized to do it by the printed page. I'm authorized to do it in any manner that will be effective and helpful and convenient to you and to me, as we together work together to learn the gospel and study the scriptures. But I am bound by that which God has specified, in that I must preach and teach the gospel and not the doctrines of men. Jesus said, when you do that and you follow the doctrines of men, that makes what you're doing in vain, as is taught in Matthew 15, verses 7 through 9. But let's go with that in mind now and look at that next part, which brings us back to the subject of baptism. Jesus said go. How? He didn't specify. And think about the wisdom of that. The wisdom of God. Because if he said run into all the world and preach the gospel, that'd be the only way that you could go. Or if he said walk into all the world, then you couldn't go by boat, you couldn't go by plane or car or anything else. But God left it to man's better judgment, knowing that circumstances would need to be considered in the best way to go. But then he said, you go preach the gospel, and the one that believes and is baptized shall be saved. Well, what about that baptism? Now, the baptism itself is given as essential to salvation. Between the sinner and his salvation, directly between him and that sinfulness and that salvation, is the act of being baptized based upon his faith in the gospel. Well, what about that baptism? For an example, where do I need to go to be baptized? He didn't tell us that. There are a lot of different wheres. And you could use a river. You could use a creek. You could use a swimming pool. You could use some tub of water. I have been present and assisted on different occasions in helping baptize someone in a hospital or in a nursing home where there was a large tub of water that was normally used for physical rehabilitation, but it was large enough and deep enough that we were able to baptize in the water in that tub. That would be all right. And you could be baptized in any place provided there's enough water for immersion. Because you see, baptism is immersion. It doesn't just mean immersion, and immersion is not just one way of being baptized. Because there are religions today that'll teach whether you can have water sprinkled on you, or you can have some water poured on you, or you can be immersed and you choose which. But that's not taught in the Scriptures. The word baptism is actually a transliteration of the Greek word baptizo, meaning to immerse, to plunge, to bury, to dip, and so on. And so when you are baptized, you are buried, you are immersed, but not in dirt or not in sand, but you are immersed in water. As John 3:23 says, John was baptizing in Enon near to Salem because there was much water there. Jesus came to John the Baptist to be baptized to set the example for man, and that was at the river. And so Jesus in the Jordan River was immersed, setting the example for all of us. Water is involved. Okay, so where? Well, the location is not specified, but there is an implication there, and it's a necessary implication. And that is, the necessary implication is that there be enough water for an immersion to take place. Now, implied, an authority by the implication would be what we have come to call a baptistry in the church building. And we've understood that the location is not specified. And so implied is water. Enough water, that's necessarily implied in order for immersion to take place. And back through the years, and I remember as a boy watching preachers baptize people in creeks and in rivers and in ponds. And I have witnessed as a boy, I remember witnessing preachers who would take sticks and they would go out and have to sort of jab at the ice that was on top of that water, and they would break up that ice so that they could wade on out into the water and then baptize somebody. Needless to say, it was quite uncomfortable for the people being baptized and the people doing the baptizing. And there were times when it was easy to do that, at other times not so easy. And so over a period of time, it just began to occur to people, wait a minute, instead of doing this in a river, instead of doing this in a creek or in a swimming pool, or why don't we just put a pool of water in the church building? And when somebody wants to be baptized, we're already there for worship, and we already have the pool of water, and it'll be convenient, and we can even keep that water at a nice temperature so that it's not uncomfortable for anybody. We just use some good judgment in that. But when we take someone into that pool of water inside the church building, and they go down into that water, and we take that person and assist him in obeying the Lord by immersing him in that water in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of his sins, we're doing exactly what the Bible authorizes, requires, and commands, and that's be baptized. Be the same thing as if you did it outside in a creek. You're still doing the same action, and you're authorized to do it in a pool of water inside of a building, just like you would be authorized to do it in a pool of water outside of the building. So the authorization is by implication. A baptistry is implied in the command to be baptized, but not necessarily, because you could do it without a baptistry. You could just do it in a natural pool of water somewhere. But necessarily implied is that there be enough water for immersion to take place. And I have seen people, when being baptized, that they've been standing up straight, and the preacher would assist them by baptizing them in the water, just laying them straight back, and they don't even bend their knees, they just go straight back. Other times the preacher will instruct, maybe the water's shallow enough that he'll say it'll assist us, or the pool is small enough, it'll be assisting if you will just bend your knees, so they bend their knees. I've also known of baptisms taking place where a person would sit down in the water, and I've assisted in one like this, where they sit down in the water because of the dimensions of the pool being limiting, and the person then being baptized would have the preacher or the one assisting him would lean him forward, and he would just lean over into the water and be totally immersed. That's okay. God didn't say anything about the posture that somebody has to have. God didn't specify that. He left that to man's better judgment. That's left up to man's wisdom, and it illustrates the wisdom of God. But the thing that is not left up to man's judgment is being immersed in water for the remission of sins. That's what is specified, and that's what's required in order to be acceptable unto God. You can take that same thought, that same principle, and apply it maybe in another area, such as in the music that we have in worship. The scriptures teach us in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 19, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord. Or Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly in all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Those scriptures tell us to sing praise unto God and sing unto God from our hearts. The instrument that is called for there is not a mechanical instrument, it's that fleshly instrument. No, not the pump in one's chest, but that fleshly part of man that it involves his mind. That's what he uses from his heart, from his mind, and he sings from his heart unto God. That's what's authorized. Specifically, a kind of music, and it's vocal music. But what if a person were to then want to use mechanical music like a guitar or drums or a wind instrument and so on? What if he wanted to do that instead of the vocal music or in addition to the vocal music? Well, the reality is he would be using a kind of music that he has no authority from, and you would ask him, where's your authority for this? And he couldn't say from God, because God hasn't authorized it. He could not say God has commanded it, because he hasn't. He couldn't say I have an example of it in the New Testament in Christian worship, because you don't have such. It's not implied, it's another kind of music. And so if you're going to do that which God has authorized, you will engage in singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. And the use of mechanical instruments of music will be without authority from God, because it adds another kind of worship, another kind of music rather. Now at that point someone may say, well now wait a minute, on Sunday where you preach, talking to me, someone will say, where you preach, don't you all use hymn books? And I'll say, yes, we do, because there are very, very few songs in the hymn book that we have with over 900 hymns in it. There are very few of those I know by heart. And I know some of them, I know the music by heart, the words by heart, but I don't know all the notes by heart. So we use a hymn book, and that is an aid or an assistance to us as we sing, so that we can sing all the words, and so that we don't have to stumble and stammer over the words, and we're just doing that to aid us. And someone says, but wait a minute, what authority do you have for that? Where is the authority for that hymn book? Well, the authority for it is in that commandment to sing. Because, you see, think of the reasoning now, the line of reasoning that you have to follow. Sing. Okay? Suppose on a Sunday morning you have a congregation gathered and someone gets up, okay, it's time to start worshiping, we'll start by singing. Everybody sing. And that's all he says. You can imagine the chaos that would erupt. Someone over here singing one song, over here somebody singing a different song. It would just be chaos. So to sing and it not be chaos, but be done decently and in order, we'll all sing the same song. But you see, you can't sing a song without a pitch. Now, you might have the wrong pitch, but you're going to have a pitch when you sing it. And so, if you're going to have just everybody singing on their own, you'd have different, it'd still be chaotic. So, to do it in an organized way, we have someone who stands up and he sets the standard of the pitch. We'll sing it at this pitch. He sees what the notes are. He starts it then according to the notes on pitch. And you have to have a tempo, whether it's slow or fast or whatever. And so it's written with a time signature and so on. And so he follows that and he directs the singing. But then what if we don't all have the words memorized? We still could have chaos. So to assist us, we have the song director, and to assist us, we have the words printed so that we can look at those words as the director leads us. And as he leads us, and as we hold that hymn book, or in this day and time, it's common in some places to project the words on a screen. So as we look at the words on the screen and we follow the direction of the leader, we're doing something. Now, what are we doing? We're singing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, which is what's required. We're using the kind of music that God has authorized, which is vocal. And in doing that vocal music, we're using a leader to help us. We're using the notes and the words to assist us and give us the opportunity to do it decently and in order. So all of that's implied. And the songbook is authorized by implication. But no, it's not a necessary implication. You could sing without the songbook. If everybody knows the word, if everybody knows the song, you could sing without the songbook or without the words being projected on the wall or on a screen. It is just a matter of using good judgment. But if you bring somebody in with a guitar and drums and a keyboard, now then you're adding another kind of music for which you have no authority from God. And if somebody asks you, by what authority do you do this? You'd have to say, it's not from God. You'd have to admit that. Now if you say, by what authority do you sing? Well, we have authority from God for that. By what authority do you use a songbook? It's implied in the singing. You have to have words, and you have to have some kind of direction and leadership in it. So you see, applying this in a specific or generic authority, it's sort of like you hire somebody to come into maybe a place of work, and they're going to come in and clean that place of work. And you tell them, I need you to mop this floor. I want you to clean the floor, then I want you to mop the floor. And you don't have to say, get a bucket of water, or get a mop, or get some soap. You don't have to say all that specifically. You just tell them in a general way what you want them to do. But But if you want them to do something specifically, you specify, and if you don't want them to do something, then you specify what you don't want them to do. That's specific and generic authority. Just like a father saying to a son, bring me a box. He'd bring him any box and do what his dad has said. But if he says, son, bring me a cardboard box, now then a wooden box or a metal box will not be acceptable because his daddy specified a kind of box. And God has told us what is required in order to have forgiveness of sins. And God has told us how He wants us to worship Him. And specifically, as we've illustrated today, one of those acts of worship is the making of music unto God from our hearts with vocal music. For that, we have authority from God. Making music mechanically would be a kind of music for which we have no authority from God. So, what is the conclusion to it all? Well, I'll tell you what it comes down to. How important is it to you and me to please God? Are we going to do things the way He has said, or will we stubbornly defy what He has said and do it the way we want to do it? That's how important this matter is. And you can take these points that I've made and the principles that I've presented and make application in a lot of different directions with anything that we do, because all that we do in service to God must be by His authority, or He doesn't accept it. So may I suggest to you, look at the things that are taught in the church where you worship. Look at the things that are practiced and ask, by what authority do we do this? And who gave us that authority? Consider it seriously. I'm David Sain, thanking you for watching, and I bid you a very pleasant good day.
Brightness, 10. Volume, selected. Focus, selected. Screen record.